Hello everyone and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host, Code Marvelous, and today we're going to do something we haven't done in a very long time. We're going to go over one of my original deck lists. So for today I have NEH archetype that I've been working on for quite some time that I'm referring to as the Temple of Eternity. So for anyone who might be new to the game, Near Earth Hub is the NBN identity that has 17 influence, 45 card size, and the first time you create a new remote server, you draw one card, which is going to become pretty important once you see what the rest of this deck does. So, when you think about building an NEH deck, similar to maybe HB, but even more so, you want to have an incentive to install things, and you want to tax out the runner's clicks and credits by making them trash items that you're putting in these remote servers and checking those servers to keep you honest. So the basic premise from a high level of this deck is to get a lot of value out of the assets that they don't want to take the time to trash, and the must trash assets make them harder to get rid of so that you have the monetary advantage to res ice and to fast advance. So just to kind of go through it, we're actually not going to start with Agenda Suite because it's kind of standard. I want to start with the assets so you can have a better understanding of what this deck is really trying to do. So let's go ahead and start with the assets. So in this deck we have 3 daily business shows. So in any kind of deck, when you're drawing lots of cards, right, and you're depending on a fast advance strategy to close, you need to be able to see the cards that you want and kind of filter through your deck, right? If I'm already winning monetarily, I don't need the third pad campaign as my draw. What I really need is that Astro script while my Sansan is still rezzed and untrashed. So having multiple daily business shows that are going to be difficult to get rid of can either help you win the game by helping you get through your deck faster and get the agendas that you can't score to the bottom if it's in the early game. And in addition to that, Daily Business Show is an incredible target for trashing. So in a way, Daily Business Show kind of tanks for other assets in this deck because more often than not, they will trash a Daily Business Show if they see one. So we have 2 encryption protocols, which is the HB asset that increases the install costs of all the trash costs of all installed cards by 1, including itself. This is a tremendous card. It's going to get you a free draw. It's not going to cost you anything to res. It can give you Turtleback and Diversified Portfolio money, and it just makes everything in this deck worse. But a lot of times, because of how fast NBN can win the game, they don't ever have time to trash it. So a lot of times encryption protocol just stays on the table the entire game, making every trash that they do need to make that much worse. While we're on the subject of making trashes worse, the other major asset that kind of makes this deck work is hostile infrastructure. Now, anyone who's been watching the channel for a long time knows that I really love the card Hostile Infrastructure. It's a 5 cost, 5 to trash Jinteki asset that says whenever the runner trashes a corp card, including Hostile Infrastructure, you do 1 net damage to them. This doesn't sound like much until you realize that while one of these is hiding on the table or already rezzed, you're basically immune to Apocalypse. Because if they run all 3 centrals, and let's say this Hostile Infrastructure isn't rezzed yet, if you res it right after they finish the 3rd run, then if they play that Apocalypse and you've got, more than 6 cards on the table, then if they play Apocalypse, they just instantaneously flatline. In addition to that, if they want to trash any of your money assets or your Sansan city grids, they're going to need to get rid of this first. So it does the damage while they're taking it out, and it costs 5 or maybe more to trash, which is a huge tempo hit for most runners. And because of another card in this deck, the downside of it being 5 to res is somewhat mitigated in this deck. We have 3 Jackson Howards, and Jackson Howard is here for the same reason it's in every Corp deck. I don't use it to cycle through my deck more quickly too often unless I'm really starving for ice, because you're going to be drawing a ton anyway, and you don't want to rip through your deck too fast, because a lot of what this deck is all about is keeping your agenda density in R&D lower, so you don't want to rip through your deck faster than you need to. So a big part of Jackson Howard is the noise protection and the flood protection, but other than that, you're really only using it to get back things in an emergency or to decrease the agenda density in R&D by shuffling money cards or other assets back in. So here's one of the cards that makes this build possible. We have 3x Mumba Temples, which is the neutral 2 influence asset from the first pack of the Mumbad cycle. And this card is just tremendous. It costs 0 if you have 15 or fewer ice in your deck, which we do, and it gives you 2 recurring credits for rezzing cards. Note that it doesn't say rezzing assets or rezzing ice. It says 2 res cards. So if you can kind of asset spam, which is what this deck is all about, get a couple of these out with an encryption protocol maybe, you could just start rezzing all of these high value assets that cost a ton to trash without significantly impacting your own economy. And they still have to pay at least 3 to come in and get them, and maybe a card if there's a hostile infrastructure on the table. And if they make the decision to just leave them, then you're going to be getting 2 credits a turn to either res new assets or to res ice. One of the other important things about this is you want to always use these credits if they're unused before your turn starts when they get refreshed. So what will happen is if they don't run and force me to res ice, well, then what I'll do is I'll use the 2 credits on this to res the pad campaign or the daily business show or res a hostile infrastructure, and then right at the beginning of my turn, the credits come back, so I'm getting max value out of them. I would also say if somebody runs one of these while it's face down and you have another asset that can be rezzed, I would spend the 1 to get the 2 credits immediately, use it to res something else, and then let them trash it after you get the value out of it. So, but what if, Code Marvelous, what if they just trash everything, right? What if they're going after everything you have? Well, there is an answer for that in asset spam, and that is to install more than one thing a turn. But also, we have another new card from the Mumbad cycle, which makes this strategy more viable, even against people like Wizard. Now, I'm not going to lie. When you play this deck, it is a difficult matchup against Wizard. However, this card helps tremendously. So, Museum of History is a 1-cost, 3 to trash asset that has a 0 influence cost if you have 50 or more cards, which we do. When your turn begins, you can shuffle 1 card from archives into R&D. This card is incredibly powerful in this archetype because it lets me break R&D lock by shuffling my deck, and it lets me get back whatever they trashed. So the agendas that they want to steal are potentially still farther away, and I have the opportunity to get that asset or upgrade again and just reinstall it, remake the money off of Turtlebacks, redraw the card. So I'm just continually going to get that value. It's not like in asset spam before, where if they really went crazy on trashing your assets, you had only Jacksons to really get things back, or maybe a couple of archived memories. This, every turn that they don't deal with it, something that they spent money and a click getting rid of, is going to come back all into the deck, decreasing the agenda density in R&D, and also just giving you that power. The other thing that's neat about this, I've been a long-time noise player, as anybody who's watched the channel for a significant amount of time will know. This deck, if you don't run at the end of your turn as noise every turn, you know, let's say you mill 2 or 3 cards and you happen to pick one agenda out of those cards, right, as one of the ones you flipped over. I'm going to just put it back with Museum of History. So the archives pressure still exists in that you're still milling other cards. But if you don't check archives every turn as noise with a Museum of History on the table, you're probably never going to get those agendas that you're milling. They're always going to get shuffled back into R&D, which, as you'll see later, when I test the deck, is where I put 90% of the ice in this deck, is all piled onto R&D. to make the access is really hard to come by. But yeah, Museum of History really makes this thing, shuffles back in whatever you've trashed, whatever has been trashed, or whatever you had to pitch early. So the deck can just keep playing, keep going until you're ready to win. I will say, actually, I'm going to go back to that, because on the Museum of History, it is important to note that if you're already significantly ahead and you need to find agendas to win, like you've got a scoring window, they can't get into R&D, you've got the Res Sand, I will occasionally skip turns of shuffling things back in if I don't have a Res Daily Business show, because I want to make sure that I'm getting to the agendas when I want to find them. One of the things that was originally in this deck was 2 of Fast Track, which I then cut for some other things, but sometimes I really do want them, because since you're constantly replenishing your agenda density, it can be sometimes hard for you to find the agendas when you have the window. So we have 3x Pad Campaign. Pad Campaign is a fantastic card in NEH. It's a great asset, and you might be rezzing it for free with Mumba Temples, and if they want to keep you down early, they have to pay 4 for it, where you might be paying 2 or 0 for it, and you got a card draw, and you might have gotten Turtlebacks money. So there's just a tremendous amount of value there. So for those of you who haven't really seen a lot of these Near Earth Hub asset spam decks, the whole idea is to get as much value out of that install as possible. So by playing Turtlebacks, by playing Mumba Temple, and by playing other things like Diversified Portfolio, we're going to make it so that each one of those installs becomes draw, money on its own, and money later in the form of Diversified Portfolio, so we can maximize the value there. So we have 1 of Shannon Claire, which replaced 1 of the Fast Tracks. So not a lot of use for this card yet in a lot of competitive decks, but in this it's great. Because if somebody is about to make a big dig, because they saved up the money and they can finally get through my R&D ice, and they've got the 2 RDIs down and they're going to play the Maker's Eye, Shannon Claire lets me trash it to pick an agenda and just put it at the bottom of R&D, so I can decrease the density at the top of the deck by that little bit, which can be incredibly impactful. In addition to that, since in this deck we often get multiple daily business shows rezzed, sometimes I have to make a choice that I don't really like. Like, let's say I see 3 cards and I have to discard 2. Or just 2 cards. And one's a Turtlebacks, which I want. And then the other one is another Mumba Temple. Well, then I can take the Turtlebacks as my draw, install it, draw whatever the top card of R&D is, use Shannon Claire as click 2 to draw the Mumba Temple off the bottom of the deck, the one that I was forced to pitch, and then put that down, getting the money from Turtlebacks. So you can kind of mitigate how much daily business show is going to make you choose between multiple cards that you want by using Shannon Claire, and like I said, she's an emergency agenda density reducer. We have 1 of Team Sponsorship. A lot of NEH asset spam decks have multiple team sponsorships. I only have 1 because due to the fact that we're running Museum of History, a lot of times I only want to install 1 card because maybe there's only 1 in archives, or usually what I'm using team sponsorship for, which is, whenever you score an agenda, you may install a card from archives or HQ, ignoring the install cost. I use team sponsorship to install ice. It's not uncommon for me to go 5 or 6 ice deep on R&D, and team sponsorship helps me set up that tower of power without having to spend the install credits. We have 2x Turtlebacks, which is just a fantastic card. It's incentivizing you for what you're going to do anyway, so that first install every turn, in addition to being a card draw, is going to be at least 1 credit, maybe 2 if you have both of them rezzed. So it just rewards you for going laterally, and again, like a lot of the other cards in this deck, they have to pay a lot more to get rid of it than you had to do to res it, especially if you ended up rezzing it for free with Mumba Temple, right? Value exchanges. You spent 1 click, you gained a card, and money, they are going to spend a click and, maybe lose a card to hostile infrastructure, pay at least 4 to get rid of it. So you're getting more value out of than they're getting from trashing it. So we have 3x Cyberdeck's Virus Suite. So most decks in the current meta are running 2 Cyberdeck's Virus Suites. This deck is running 3 of them. 1, because more servers, more money. And I want to be able to have multiples on the table if possible to break Clot Lock, since I'm depending on a fast advance win condition. I don't want somebody to, SMC out a Clot and then be able to clone ship it and then be able to clone ship it again. I want to be able to score. And in addition to that, medium is a serious enemy of this deck. So I need to be able to purge those virus counters in order to make it show that their R&D digs, they're only maybe accessing 1 or 2 cards when they access R&D, so they're spending a lot of money to get in and not getting a lot in return. That's super critically important. So I wanted 3 so I can find it early and start shuffling it through either with team sponsorship or Museum of History and try to make it so that there's always at least 1, preferably 2 on the table. And once again, if I'm reinstalling the Cyberdeck's Virus Suites over and over and over again, creating new servers, that's more Turtleback money and more draw, getting me closer to victory. So we have 3x Sand City Grids. So Sand City Grid, everybody should know by this point what it does. It enables you to fast advance and start the Astro Train, helps you close out games. It's really incredible to me in this deck, in the late game, how many times the Sand City Grid just goes untrashed. Because if I have an encryption protocol and 1 or 2 hostile infrastructures, people will just say, forget it, I'm just going to lock HQ. I'm going to try to lock R&D and win that way because I don't want to spend money in cards getting rid of a Sand City Grid. But when they do that, it makes it so that you don't really have to ice HQ at all unless you're fearing a count siphon, because you can just windmill whatever agenda you draw, just goes right onto the Sand Grid and gets immediately scored. The only thing that doesn't fit into that role is Global Food, which I'm almost always going to be putting to the bottom of the deck with Daily Business Show. So Sand City Grid, incredible card, hard to get rid of. And one of the craziest things that you can do in this deck is, if they didn't run or make you res anything, if you've got the Mamba Temples on the table, you can spend all 6 credits off the Mamba Temple to res the Sand City Grid at the end of their turn for free, and then score something, install something with team sponsorship, and then use the new Mamba credits to res that. It's just a tremendous synergy between the Mamba Temples and the horizontal NEH game. So Sand City Grids, tell your friends. They should be on the most wanted list because they're great. We have 2 Diversified Portfolio. The reason for this card being in there is because we're going to have a lot of remote servers unless we're having an incredibly bad game. So this is always going to net you more than a hedge fund, always going to net you more than a sweeps week. So what ends up happening a lot of times is when they're gearing up for that big run into R&D, and I've got a ton of unresed ice on R&D that's going to cost me a mountain of credits, I can pop the Diversified Portfolio for 14, 15 credits, and then immediately be ready to res and defend R&D from a big dig. It's also incredible recovery from account siphon, assuming they didn't trash your assets afterwards. So as far as ice is concerned, we're pretty ice light, actually. We're only running 12 pieces of ice. So we have 3 wraparounds. Early gear check. It hates on Faust because it has that 7 strength if they don't have their corroder down. And, protects you from the siphon early. It's that kind of stuff. We have 2 Archangels. We're going to have a lot of money in this deck, so I want an ambush ice that disincentivizes them digging big in R&D or running HQ too much, because then I'm getting that 6 strength trace that I can use to bounce something important back in their deck. We have 3 pop-up windows because if I'm installing them with team sponsorship and if I could pile them on R&D, a lot of times I can just make money while they're trying to get ahead, and it just improves my advantage. I'll also, against Wizard, I'll put one of the pop-ups in front of a money asset like the Mumba Temple or the Turtlebacks, just to make it that little bit better return. So, I'm cutting into that effective bonus that Wizard has by making them spend the 1 credit to get in and giving me 1 credit, which is effectively a 2 increased cost. It's a 2 credit swing in my favor. So it kind of turns his benefit into only being 1 credit. We have 2 toll booths. The toll booths are like the linchpin of this deck. These 9 times out of 10 will go on R&D, because dealing with double toll booth is always going to be terrible. And, it's going to cost them 6 just to encounter both of them. Maybe they're using a David, but that's still 2 counters off the David. But if they're using normal breakers, it's still going to just chew up a ton of money. And it helps make it so that they can only run R&D every so often. So unless they're running RDIs or, Maker's Eye, if they're running medium, because we're in an Anarch heavy meta, if I've got the Cyber decks, and you end up spending tons of money or chewing up an entire set of David counters to get through to R&D, only, and 6 credits, only to find that I'm going to purge your virus counters and make it so that you only see 1 card, that's going to hurt you bad. Along that note, we also have 2x Assassins. They're fantastic. They're very well valued. If you can get somebody to face check this, it's almost always super impactful. And again, it just chews up David counters on R&D, making it so that they get less accesses when they're trying to make those big digs. They have less of those high power runs available to them. So some high level things that I'm going to talk about with this deck before we do the test run. Play smart and slow. Take your time. Don't try to autopilot this deck. Think about what you're installing. Think about whether you can deal with the extra card coming into HQ, because, if you've only got a wraparound on HQ and you're like, oh, I just drew another pad campaign, let me put that down, and then it draws you an Astro script, but now you don't have enough clicks to score it. If they legwork you the next turn, that's going to set you behind, potentially. So you want to make sure that you play careful. You think about what you can protect. I usually try to, be very wary of my installs, right? Also, if you're up against a wizard or somebody who's playing scrubber, try to install at least 2 assets a turn. Because, okay, yeah, they're going to be installing 1 or trashing 1 effectively for free. But if they keep checking everything, if they keep trashing everything you're putting down, they're going to crash their economy, and then it's going to give you that breathing room to put down the Museum of History and start recycling that stuff back in. That having been said, if you're up against a wizard player, I would focus on getting the money assets like Mumba Temple, Pad Campaign, and Turtlebacks on the table before you put Museum of History. I usually wait to put Museum of History down against a wizard player, if possible, until after they've kind of given up on trashing things. Because if I can get to that point where they've really given up on trashing things, then I can start cycling whatever they did trash back in. But if this is like the first thing you put down, and they haven't hit that ennui point of being sick of checking your servers, they're just going to get rid of it immediately, and you're not going to get any value out of it. So that's basically the deck. Oh, right. Agendas. So we have 3 AstroScript pilot programs, which are in there for the same reasons that they're in every Fast Advanced deck. They're absolutely worth the lost influence in this deck, because if they trash the Sansan, a scored AstroScript just changes the game for NBN. It makes it so that you can just windmill any 3-2 that you draw right out of your hand, so that, again, HQ can be lightly iced while R&D just becomes this mountainous quagmire for them to deal with. We have 2 breaking news. I like having the breaking news just because it gives you that ability to trash a resource, right? If they've got that Katie with money on it, if they've got that scrubber, you can get rid of it, and it triggers team sponsorship. So if you just lost a critical asset, you can get that back onto the table really easily. It's good for the same reason it's always been good. You can get it out of your hand. You can, make a new server with it, getting a free draw. You can get some Turtlebacks money, and if you've got the sand rezzed, you can get rid of a resource. I have a 1 of Appaloosa, which I can hypothetically score if I have a res sand and an astroscript counter, but normally I don't. A lot of times this actually ends up sitting on the table as bluffing as an asset. In the early game, I kind of use it as a litmus test to see if they're going to check every single server, even stuff I don't res. If they run it, okay, maybe I lose 2 points. Definitely don't do that bluff if you're behind. But if they do run it early, I'm going to get 5 credits, and I know that they're the kind of person who's going to run everything I put down, so I know that I can't put a 3-2 down and hope to bluff it out. But at least I can make that test while getting something in return for it. I have global foods, which are really just to keep the agenda density down. I will be using Daily Business Show to shuffle them to the bottom all the time. I try not to ever score them unless I have to. It's very difficult to score a 5-3 in this deck. And then we have 3x Project Beals because they're the other NBN 3-2 that we can score out on a res sand and we can use to close the game with astroscript. So that is my Temple of Eternity deck, broken down pretty simply. Everybody stay tuned for the test run where I'm going to take this deck for a spin on Jinteki and see how we do with it. You can find us on Twitter, on SoundCloud, and on Facebook. We'll catch you all next time.